I was late for what should have been the most important meeting of my life, a moment that would decide not only my future, but the future of the man I loved. I was on my way to meet my fiancé's father, a man whispered about in boardrooms, revered in business schools, and feared by nearly everyone who had ever crossed his path. Arthur Sterling, the reclusive billionaire, a legend built of silence and shadows. That afternoon, the weight of expectation pressed against my chest so tightly I could barely breathe. David, my fiancé, had spent the entire week warning me, preparing me, drilling into me what this meeting would mean. My father doesn't believe in second chances. He had set his eyes wide, with a nervousness that made him look nothing like the calm, confident man I had fallen in love with. This dinner, it isn't dinner. It's a test. Everything depends on it. Our engagement, the wedding, our entire future. Ava, please, you cannot fail this. So I had done everything to prepare. I chose the navy blue dress David had insisted on, simple, yet elegant, a dress he said would signal restraint and class. I wore the soft, expensive cashmere scarf he had bought me, wrapping it carefully around my neck like armor. I rehearsed safe topics in the mirror: art, history, economics, avoiding the landmines of charity, my nonprofit job, or the humble background I carried like a secret shame. It felt less like meeting a future father-in-law, and more like preparing for trial, with the verdict poised to determine whether I would be welcomed into a dynasty or cast out like David's older brother, disowned years ago for marrying a woman deemed unsuitable. My stomach churned with nerves, but beneath it was a quiet defiance. Part of me resented how much I was expected to mold myself into something I wasn't, to shrink the parts of me that were too soft, too ordinary, too unprofitable. I wanted to belong, yes, but not like this, not by erasing who I was. When the train pulled into the secluded station near the Sterling estate, I still had 20 minutes before dinner. The air was cool, sharp against my skin, and for a moment I thought walking the mile to the mansion might steady me. I wanted to feel the ground beneath my feet to slow my pounding heart. That's when I saw him, an old man sitting alone on a bench at the edge of a manicured green. He was the only thing in that pristine town that looked out of place. His clothes were threadbare, his jacket far too thin for the crisp air. His hands trembled slightly as he folded them in his lap, his face marked by deep lines that spoke of a hard life. He looked hungry, cold, and so utterly, profoundly alone. My first instinct was to keep walking. David's words echoed in my mind. Don't be late. Don't get distracted. Don't mess this up. I could almost hear his voice hissing in my ear even though he was nowhere near. My feet hesitated, torn between obligation and something deeper, something older. Then I looked into the man's eyes. Clear, intelligent, startlingly blue. Behind the exhaustion and weathered lines was a quiet sadness that pierced me in a way I couldn't ignore. And in that moment, my grandmother's voice returned to me from years ago, words I had once dismissed as old-fashioned wisdom. The true measure of your character, my dear, is how you treat those who can do nothing for you. To hell with the test. I walked toward him, my scarf brushing lightly against my throat, my heart beating in a rhythm of decision. Are you all right, sir? I asked softly. He lifted his gaze to mine, and for a moment I saw not just weariness, but a flicker of surprise, like he hadn't expected anyone to stop. Just a bit cold, young lady, he rasped, his voice low and rough but steady. And I think I missed the lunch service at the shelter. I reached into my bag and pulled out the simple sandwich I had packed for myself, turkey and Swiss on wheat bread. It was the only food I had for the evening, but without a second thought I held it out to him. Here, it's not much, but it's yours. He looked at the sandwich, then back at me, his eyes unreadable. Finally, he accepted it with a nod. Thank you. That's very kind. I noticed him shiver again. An instinct moved me before reason could stop me. I unwrapped the cashmere scarf from around my neck, the one David had said was essential, the one he thought would make me look the part. I draped it gently over the man's shoulders. You need this more than I do. He touched the fabric lightly, his blue eyes searching mine with an intensity that made me feel strangely seen. You are a very kind woman, he said quietly. I smiled faintly, wished him well, and hurried away, my pulse thundering. But even as I walked faster, panic set in. I checked my watch. I was late. Not just late, catastrophically late. By the time I reached the towering iron gates of the Sterling estate, my breath was ragged, my shoes damp with grass. The gates loomed like judgment itself, a golden S curling into the metalwork, like a seal of power. I pressed the intercom, my voice trembling. Ava Peters, here to see Mr. Sterling. A long pause stretched heavy and suffocating. Then with a mechanical groan, the gates swung open. The driveway was a winding path through ancient oaks, a cathedral of branches arching overhead. By the time the mansion came into view, a sprawling three-story stone masterpiece, I felt dwarfed, not just by its size, but by the weight of history pressing down on me. And there was David pacing at the top of the steps like a caged animal. The moment he saw me, his face twisted with fury. "Ava, where in God's name have you been?" he hissed, gripping my arm. "You're 17 minutes late. You know he hates tardiness. Do you realize what you've done?" "I'm sorry," I whispered, breathless. "I was walking and there was an old man. He was cold. He hadn't eaten. I gave him my sandwich and an old man." David's face contorted in disbelief. "A homeless man. You were late to meet my father. A man who judges everything because you stopped for a bum. And your scarf. Where is it?" "I gave it away," I admitted. He was freezing. David stared at me like I had spoken another language. "A $700 scarf. Gone. Ava, what is wrong with you? This isn't one of your charity cases. This is my father." His words cut sharp, but beneath his rage, I saw what he really was: terrified. Terrified of his father's judgment. Terrified that my compassion had just destroyed his chances at the approval he had been chasing his whole life. For a moment, I almost crumbled under the weight of his scorn, but then a strange calm settled over me. I had made a choice on that park bench, and I knew deep down it was the right one. If that choice made me unsuitable for the Sterling family, then so be it. The massive oak doors opened, and the butler's voice echoed like dry paper. "Mr. Sterling will see you now." I followed David inside through a foyer vast enough to swallow me whole past priceless paintings and cold marble floors. Every step felt like a march toward judgment. The butler stopped before enormous doors. "Mr. Sterling is waiting in the dining room." I braced myself as the doors opened. My heart stopped. At the far end of the cavernous table, under a chandelier that glittered like a frozen constellation, sat the old man from the park bench, my scarf draped neatly around his shoulders. And he was smiling at me. For a moment I thought my heart had stopped. The air in that cavernous dining room grew so still that even the chandeliers seemed to hum with silence. My eyes locked onto his, the same startlingly blue eyes I had seen at the park bench, only now they glittered with an authority I hadn't recognized before. The scarf, my scarf, draped neatly around his shoulders like an unspoken reminder of the choice I had made. I felt the ground shift beneath me as realization dawned. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't fate playing tricks. The homeless man I had fed, the man I had given my scarf to, was Arthur Sterling himself, the reclusive billionaire, my fiancé's father. David gasped beside me, his entire body stiffening. His face drained of color as though he'd been struck. "Father," he whispered, his voice cracking. What are you?" Arthur raised a hand, silencing him. His gaze never left me. There was no anger in his eyes, no disappointment, only something unreadable, a mix of amusement and gravity that made my chest tighten. "Come," he said at last, his voice carrying across the long table like a verdict. "Sit with me." The butler gestured to a chair near him, far from where David stood, rooted to the spot. My legs felt heavy, yet somehow I moved the echo of my heels against marble, impossibly loud in the silence. I lowered myself into the chair, my palms damp against the polished wood of the armrests. Arthur studied me, his fingers brushing lightly over the scarf as though it were evidence. "Do you know," he began slowly, "how many people have passed me on that bench over the years? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Not one stopped. Not one looked twice. They averted their eyes, too busy or too frightened to see me." His voice was steady, but there was a rawness beneath it, like steel hiding fire. And then he continued, leaning slightly forward, "You came along. Not only did you see me, you gave me your food. And when you noticed I was cold, you gave me this." A woman on her way to meet a man she thought could destroy her future, and still she gave. I swallowed hard, my chest tight with disbelief. I didn't know it was you. I just thought you needed it. Arthur smiled faintly, precisely. David finally found his voice, though it trembled. Father, this is absurd. You were testing her. Pretending to be. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Arthur's gaze shifted to him sharp as a blade. Pretending to be what? Invisible, worthless. That is how the world treats people without power, David, and that is how I test the character of those who wish to enter this family. David's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked as though the floor might swallow him whole. Arthur turned back to me, his eyes softening, though his tone remained grave. Tell me, Ava, why did you stop? Why risk being late to a meeting you believed could decide your future? I took a shaky breath, the truth rising in me like something I couldn't contain. Because I couldn't look into your eyes and walk away. Because I was raised to believe that if you can help, you should. And because my voice faltered, but I forced it steady, because no amount of wealth or approval is worth more than our humanity. If that cost me this family, then so be it. The room went still again, my words lingered heavy, undeniable. Arthur's expression shifted just slightly, but enough for me to see something I hadn't expected. Pride. You remind me of someone, he said quietly, almost to himself. Someone I lost a long time ago. I didn't know what he meant, but his words carried a weight that made me ache. Dinner was served then, though it felt more like a ritual than a meal. Plates of delicately arranged courses were placed before us, but I barely touched mine. My mind raced with the gravity of what had just happened. David sat stiffly across from me. His jaw clenched, his eyes flicking nervously between his father and me. He was unraveling, his carefully constructed vision of control slipping with every passing moment. I wanted to reach for his hand to anchor him, but I knew it would only make things worse. Arthur spoke sparingly through dinner, but every word felt deliberate testing. He asked about my work, about the nonprofit I had dedicated my life to. For the first time in years, I spoke of it openly without shame. I told him about the women I worked with, survivors of abuse and poverty. I told him about the small victories, the impossible battles, the moments of despair and triumph. He listened, really listened. His eyes never left mine, his hands resting calmly on the table, his face unreadable but intent. When I finished, he sat back silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you know why I built all this?" He gestured vaguely at the mansion, the empire beyond its walls. Not for money, not for power, for control. I believed if I controlled everything, no one could ever hurt me again. The admission startled me. The vulnerability in his tone was like a crack in marble. But he continued softly, "Control is a poor substitute for love. And tonight I am reminded of that." David finally snapped, his voice sharp with desperation. "Father, this is ridiculous. She's not suitable. She doesn't come from our world. Enough!" Arthur's voice thundered, reverberating through the room. The chandeliers seemed to tremble with the force of it. David flinched, shrinking into silence. Arthur's eyes blazed as he turned to him. "Do you know what makes someone suitable, David? Not their pedigree, not their wealth, not their ability to mimic our manners. Character, compassion, integrity. Things you seem to have forgotten." The words landed like a blow. David's face twisted with humiliation, his hands clenching into fists. Arthur looked back at me, and his tone softened once more. "You passed the only test that mattered before you even stepped through these doors. You saw me. You gave without expectation. And for that, Ava, you have my respect." Tears burned in my eyes, though I fought to hold them back. Respect. From the man who had the power to destroy me. It felt like more than a victory, it felt like vindication. Yet beneath the relief, there was a deeper ache. Because I realized something in that moment. While Arthur had been testing me, I had been testing myself, and I had chosen to be true to who I was. For once, that was enough. The dinner ended quietly, the weight of revelation settling over us like dusk. Arthur excused himself with a nod, his scarf still draped around his shoulders, a silent reminder of the night's truth. David and I walked back through the vast foyer in silence, the echo of our footsteps the only sound. When we stepped into the night air, he finally turned to me, his face contorted with anger and something darker, fear. "You made a fool of me," he hissed. "You humiliated me in front of my father." I shook my head, my voice low but steady. "No, David, I didn't humiliate you. You did that to yourself. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw in him something I couldn't unsee. A man who valued image over truth, approval over love, control over compassion. And I wondered as we drove away from the mansion whether tonight's revelation was not just about his father's test, but about mine. The car ride back from the Sterling estate was suffocating. The leather seats felt too stiff beneath me, the silence pressing down like a second skin. Outside, the night blurred past in streaks of headlights and shadows. But inside the car, everything felt motionless, frozen in the tension that sat between us. David gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the road, but his anger pulsed through the air like a storm about to break. I wanted to speak to ease the sharpness of the silence, but something inside me stopped. For the first time since I had met him, I was afraid of what his anger might reveal. "You don't understand what you've done," he said finally, his voice low and bitter. I turned toward him, my own chest tight with unspoken words. "I didn't do anything, David. I was myself. I stopped for someone I thought needed help, that's all." That's all. His laugh was sharp, humorless. "Ava, my father has spent his life building an empire where perception is everything. You embarrassed me in front of him. You humiliated me." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "Humiliated you, David. He respected me. He said it himself. He saw me for who I am." "And that's exactly the problem," David snapped, finally tearing his gaze from the road to glare at me. His eyes burned with something fierce and ugly. "He respects you. Do you know what that means? It means he'll judge me against you for the rest of my life. It means I'll never measure up. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend your entire life chasing his approval only for him to hand it to someone else in one night?" His words cut through me, heavy with the weight of his bitterness. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about me at all. This was about David and his father, about decades of chasing validation that had always been withheld. But his bitterness didn't excuse the venom in his voice. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time I saw him not as the man I loved, but as the frightened boy who had grown into a man terrified of never being enough. A boy who had been told all his life that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned. And suddenly I wondered if I could love a man who carried that poison forward. "I'm not your rival, David," I said softly, though my voice trembled. "I'm your partner. Or at least I thought I was." His grip tightened on the wheel. "You don't get it. You never will." The rest of the drive passed in silence, each mile widening the chasm between us. When we reached my apartment, I opened the car door without waiting for him to come around. His hand shot out, gripping my wrist just before I stepped out. "Don't ruin this for us," he said, his voice low, almost pleading now. "Don't ruin me." I pulled free, my voice steady, though my heart ached. "I'm not the one ruining anything, David. That's you." I shut the door and walked into the night, the sound of the engine revving fading into the distance behind me. Inside my apartment, the silence was deafening. I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling. My scarf was gone, left on Arthur Sterling's shoulders, a symbol of the night that had changed everything. I thought of Arthur's eyes, the way he had looked at me, not as a test subject, but as a person. I thought of his words about control, about love, about the emptiness of power without compassion. And I thought of David, his rage, his fear, his inability to see me as anything other than a threat. The contrast was stark, and it terrified me. Over the next few days, things only worsened. David's calls grew shorter, colder. When we met, his temper was a constant undercurrent, snapping at small things, blaming me for the shift in his father's attention. He told me Arthur had called him not to discuss business, but to ask about me. That fact seemed to eat away at him, gnawing at his pride, until all that was left was resentment. One evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, he finally let it spill. "You think you're special because you passed his little test?" He sneered, his fork clattering onto the plate. "Don't you see he's manipulating you? He's always manipulating. That's all he knows how to do." I set my fork down gently, my hands folding in my lap. Maybe. But he didn't have to respect me. He chose to. And that respect was real, David. You saw it. His laugh was bitter sharp. "You're just like my mother. Do you know that, always falling for his games, his charm, his—" He stopped abruptly, as though the words had slipped out before he could catch them. My breath caught. Your mother. David's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. Forget it. No, I pressed gently but firmly. Tell me, what about your mother? He stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. Drop it, Ava. But I couldn't. Something in his voice and his expression told me this was the secret beneath everything, the wound that explained not just his bitterness but Arthur's coldness too. David, I said softly, rising to my feet. You can't keep carrying this alone. Whatever it is, it's killing you. For a moment his face twisted, torn between rage and grief. And then he said it, his voice low and raw. She left. My mother left him. Left us. She couldn't take his control, his obsession, his empire. And he's hated me ever since, because I remind him of her, him. The words hit me like a stone. Suddenly, Arthur's confession about control, his quiet sorrow, when he said he had lost someone long ago, it all snapped into place. Arthur had lost his wife, David had lost his mother, and both of them had been drowning in that loss ever since, punishing each other in an endless cycle of resentment. I reached for David's hand, but he pulled away, his eyes burning with unshed tears. You think you're different, Ava, but you're not. Sooner or later he'll break you too. And then he was gone, the door slamming behind him, leaving me standing in the hollow quiet of the apartment. I sank back into my chair, my mind racing. For the first time I saw the full scope of the Sterling curse, a family bound not by love but by control, by fear, by abandonment. And I realized with a chill that by loving David I was stepping directly into the same cycle. But then another thought struck me. Maybe I wasn't meant to break under it. Maybe I was meant to break it. The next morning, I woke to the faint buzz of my phone. My eyes were heavy, my body exhausted, but the name on the screen jolted me upright. Arthur Sterling. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. Why would he be calling me directly? Slowly I answered. Good morning, Ava. His voice rumbled deep and measured. I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, I said quickly, though my throat was dry. Not at all. I'd like you to join me for tea this afternoon. Just the two of us. There are things I wish to discuss, things David has never told you. I swallowed hard. My instincts screamed both danger and necessity. Of course, I'll be there. When I arrived at the Sterling estate hours later, the gates opened without hesitation, the butler greeting me with a nod that carried an unspoken acknowledgement I had been expected. Arthur was waiting in the garden, seated beneath an ancient oak tree that stretched its limbs across the manicured lawn. He still wore my scarf, though draped more neatly now, as though it had always belonged to him. His eyes lit with something warmer than before when he saw me. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. A porcelain teapot steamed between us, delicate cups already set. I sat folding my hands in my lap, waiting. Arthur poured the tea, his movements slow, deliberate. Finally, he looked at me. David told you about his mother? I nodded. He said she left. Arthur's face tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his features. Yes, she left. But what he doesn't understand is why. His voice grew heavier, tinged with something raw. I built everything you see around you for her, for the family we were supposed to have. I wanted to give her the world, but the more I built, the less of me she had. And in the end, she chose freedom over gilded cages. The honesty in his tone startled me. This was no longer the untouchable billionaire. This was a man carrying the unbearable weight of loss. David believes she abandoned us. Arthur continued, his voice cracking slightly. He doesn't know the truth. That I drove her away. That my obsession with control turned love into chains. He has spent his whole life resenting me when perhaps he should resent what I became. I sat in silence, the weight of his confession pressing against me. For the first time, I understood the fractured man before me. His empire was not born of greed, but of fear. Fear of losing, fear of never being enough. Fear of the same abandonment that had already marked him once. You're wrong about one thing, I said quietly. David doesn't just resent you. He resents himself. He thinks your disapproval means he's broken. He doesn't realize that your pain has nothing to do with him. Arthur's gaze softened, his blue eyes dimmed by sorrow. And you? Do you resent me? I hesitated, then shook my head. No, but I won't lie, I see the damage you've done. To David, to yourself, and maybe even to me. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, earnest. That's why I asked you here, Ava. Because you see what others don't. You are not blinded by ambition. You don't crave my approval, which makes you dangerous and indispensable. His words unsettled me. Dangerous, indispensable. Was that admiration or another kind of trap? Before I could ask, the garden doors slammed open. David stood there, his face twisted with fury, his chest heaving as though he'd run across the estate. So it's true, he spat, glaring at us. He's chosen you over me. I rose quickly, my heart pounding. David, it's not like that. Don't you dare! He snapped, his voice shaking with rage. You think I don't see it? The way he looks at you, the way he respects you. I've waited my whole life for that look, Ava. And in one night you stole it. Arthur stood, his own expression hardening. This isn't about her, David. This is about us, about what we've both carried for too long. No, David's voice broke, his fists clenching at his sides. It's always about you, about your tests, your games, your impossible standards. And now it's about her too. The woman I loved, the woman who was supposed to stand by me, she's standing by you. His words cut like glass, sharp and bitter. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. David, I never chose him over you. But I won't apologize for being seen, for being respected. You should want that for me, not resent it. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You don't get it, Ava. You'll never get it. He's poisoned everything. Even us. Arthur's voice was steady, but the pain in it was unmistakable. David, your mother left because of me, not you. She loved you. She always did. The words seemed to knock the breath out of David. He staggered back, his eyes wide, his face crumbling with a grief he had buried for years. No, he whispered. That's not true. She left because I was too much. Arthur admitted, his voice raw. Because I built walls instead of bridges. And I have hated myself for it every day since. But I never hated you. Never. David's shoulders shook. His eyes filling with tears he refused to let fall. He turned on his heel and stormed back through the doors, his footsteps pounding like thunder. The silence that followed was unbearable. Arthur sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. I stood there, my chest heaving, torn between running after David and staying with the broken man before me. Both needed something I wasn't sure I could give. One needed healing, the other forgiveness. Arthur looked up at me finally, his voice hoarse. You see, now don't you? This is the family you want to marry into. A family built on broken promises and unfinished grief. My throat tightened. I don't know if I can save either of you, I admitted. Arthur's gaze held mine steady and unflinching. Maybe you're not meant to save us, Ava. Maybe you're meant to save yourself. The words landed deep, unsettling, and liberating all at once. Because as much as I wanted to believe love could heal, I also knew love should not destroy. As I left the garden that afternoon, the weight of choice pressed against me heavier than ever. Stay and risk being consumed by the Sterling's endless cycle of pain, or walk away and reclaim the parts of myself I refused to lose. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which path my heart would choose. That night I couldn't sleep. My apartment was dark and silent, but my mind was a storm. Every word Arthur had spoken replayed in my head, colliding with David's rage, his grief, his bitter accusations. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, I thought. Love wasn't supposed to make you smaller, wasn't supposed to chain you to someone else's wounds. But wasn't love also about sacrifice, about patience, about trying to mend what's broken? I pressed my palms against my eyes until the darkness swirled into shapes. Was I strong enough to carry not just my own pain, but theirs too? By morning I had no answers, only the heavy truth that I couldn't keep avoiding the choice looming in front of me. David came to my apartment just after dawn. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked, his usual polished perfection fractured. He looked less like the man I had fallen in love with, and more like a boy drowning in the weight of his own despair. Ava, he said, his voice hoarse, I need you. The words hit me like a plea and a warning at once. I let him in, but as he stepped past me, I saw the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion in his face. He paced the living room like a trapped animal. I can't do this without you, he whispered. Don't leave me. Don't turn into her. Her, I asked gently. My mother. His voice broke. She walked away, and it destroyed him. It destroyed us. If you leave... He trailed off, his breath uneven. If you leave, I won't survive it. Tears stung my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. David, I don't want to leave you. But I can't stay if staying means losing myself. I won't repeat the same story your parents wrote. I won't let love become a cage. His face twisted with pain. So what? You're just going to throw everything away after everything we've been through. I stepped closer, my hand hovering near his cheek but not touching. I'm not throwing us away. I'm choosing me. And maybe choosing me is the only way to break this cycle. For a moment, his eyes softened, the anger draining into sorrow. But then, as if a wall slammed back into place, he shook his head. No, you don't get it. Without you, I have nothing. And that was the moment I knew. Because love should never be about possession. Love should never mean being someone's only lifeline. I lowered my hand. Then maybe it's time for you to learn how to swim on your own. He stared at me, shock and grief warring in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and left. The door shut with a finality that echoed through the hollow silence of my apartment. I sank onto the couch, my chest aching, my breath uneven. I had lost him. But had I ever truly had him? Later that week, an envelope arrived at my door. No return address, only my name written in a firm, elegant hand. Inside was my scarf, neatly folded, and a short note in Arthur's precise handwriting. You gave this without knowing who I was. That alone tells me everything I need to know. Take it back, not as a reminder of me, but as a reminder of yourself. Never stop being who you are. Respectfully, A.S. I pressed the scarf to my chest, tears sliding down my cheeks. Arthur Sterling, the man who had tested me, the man who had nearly broken his family with his control, had given me something David never could: permission to be myself. In the weeks that followed, I didn't see David again. Rumors swirled that he had taken an overseas post in one of the family's companies, a self-imposed exile to escape his father's shadow. Part of me ached for him, for the boy who had never learned to believe he was enough. But another part of me felt relief, because his story was not mine to fix. Arthur reached out once more, inviting me to lunch. Not as a test, not as an inquisition, but as himself, a man who wanted to talk, to reflect, to understand. We spoke of choices, of losses, of the strange roads life takes us down. And when I left that day, I realized something: I hadn't lost a family. I had simply walked away from one that was never truly mine to begin with. And in doing so, I had found something more important: myself. Because life isn't about proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. Life is about refusing to dim your light for anyone who demands it. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, not out of anger, but out of love. Love for yourself. I never married into the Sterling family, but I carried forward the lesson they unknowingly gave me. Compassion is not weakness. Humanity is not a flaw, and the truest wealth is being able to give without expectation. And if I had to choose again between being late to dinner or stopping for the man on the park bench, I would make the same choice every single time. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Maybe you felt unseen, tested, or told you weren't enough. I hope my story reminds you that your worth is not defined by others' standards. It's defined by the choices you make when no one is watching. If this story touched you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about betrayal, family resilience, and unexpected redemption. And leave a comment. I'd love to hear your story too.